Story 1. We were at an all-inclusive resort in Jamaica. Every night they had a lounge area where people could do karaoke. A middle-aged man got up and started the first few lines of Lionel Richie's song Easy. A woman from the audience ran up and tried to sing with him. He gently pushed her away 2 or 3 times as she tried to sing over his shoulder into the microphone. Finally, she stood there dejected, swaying from side to side, as the man broke from his song, professed his love to his girlfriend, and finished with a marriage proposal. They hugged and kissed, and the woman returned to her seat. I still do not understand why he chose that song to propose, but he sang it brilliantly. Story 2. Someone at my college graduation ceremony yelled, "I am queen of the world," when accepting her diploma. Not a single person laughed. Story 3. I was at a dinner party when my friend's mother-in-law asked another friend when her baby was due. She wasn't pregnant. The mother-in-law should have simply apologized, but instead she doubled down and said, "It sure looks like you're pregnant." Story 4. I was a server at an American restaurant. A family came in and the mother berated the staff. She yelled at the server, complained that the food was not the right temperature, said it was too salty, and so on. She really had it in for the 17-year-old server. He was fine, but the customer wanted someone to blame. Her husband and their teenage children looked embarrassed. She had behaved like this before. A sign on the door said, "We reserve the right to refuse service to anyone." Management decided she should not be served again. The manager covered their meals, asked them to leave, and told them not to return. The woman was upset and left negative feedback. In response to that feedback, a regular posted a picture of the woman and her family. The customer quickly removed her negative feedback. She may have deserved the public reprimand, but I felt embarrassed for her family. Story 5. One time my former roommate told a table full of his family that acquired immunodeficiency syndrome and cancer were the same thing, just after talking about how much he had been learning in his night classes. Those classes were paid for by his parents, and he was not attending them. They realized this by the time dinner was over. Story 6. I was selling some kettlebells on Facebook Marketplace and a woman in her early 40s bought them. She came to pick them up, and as I handed them to her, she obviously was not expecting them to be as heavy as they were. As she suddenly strained to counter the weight, she let out the loudest fart I have ever heard. It was gargantuan. I was shocked but also proud. I am usually pretty good at making light of any situation, but I found myself speechless. If I could, I would have returned serve, but even on my best day, I do not believe I could create such a symphony. We both stared into each other's eyes for a moment. She said, "Well," and turned and walked off. I think about her often. Story 7. While going down an escalator at the Mall of Georgia, a man in his 90s in front of me suddenly soiled himself. We were about 500 feet from a bathroom and he was wearing shorts. I felt so bad for him. My dad gave him his hoodie to wrap around his waist. I was proud of him then and still am. Story 8. Wasn't there personally, but it has since become a bit of a legend at the school. I went to and worked at a fairly large flight school attached to a university. We had a couple of thousand people enrolled in the program that ranged from zero-hour student pilots to multi-engine flight instructors. On clear, calm days you could guarantee a handful of student pilots were doing their first solo flights. One student, having completed his 2 landings by himself, taxied off the runway, switched to ground control, and asked for clearance to taxi back to the ramp and complete his first solo. Ground control obliged, gave him clearance, and congratulated him on a solo well done. The student read back the instructions but, for some reason, forgot to take his finger off the microphone button. Everyone listening to ground control could hear him, and no one could interrupt or stop him as he sang a song of his own invention about how much he loved the aircraft he was flying. For 3 minutes he serenaded the 50 or so pilots, ramp workers, air traffic controllers, and flight supervisors with "I love you, Cessna," as he taxied back to the ramp. Eventually he realized he was on the air, released the button, and ground control got back on the frequency. Over the howls of the tower cab crew laughing so hard it hurt, the controller thanked him for the song and said they would pass along the compliment at the next opportunity. Story 9. A colleague of mine gave his 2 weeks' notice. For context, he is a fairly attractive man. A woman from Human Resources came by his cubicle to wish him well and proceeded to give him a lap dance in front of the entire office. Story 10. On the day of the final exam, just as the professor was closing the door, a girl who had been nearly late every day ran in toward her seat near the top row. She tripped halfway up, rolled down a few steps, and then began performing a Peter Griffin-skinned knee routine. Story 11. A girl graduating from college fell on stage at least 3 or 4 times, as if something invisible had swept her leg out from under her. She had a what the heck expression on her face. Story 12. A student walked into class late in college. The auditorium had about 25 rows with roughly 50 seats per row, and the only open seats were in the 4th row in the middle. He arrived about 15 minutes into the lecture and opened his laptop. As soon as the screen came on, it started playing porn loudly, reaching its loudest moment before he could do anything. He could not log in fast enough to mute it, so he slammed the laptop shut, put it in his bag, and walked out while it was still blaring. We heard it finally stop as he was about to leave the building. Story 13. My old boss, who was basically in real-life Michael Scott, was describing a coworker on the first day she came in for an interview. He described her to her face as Viagra with legs. Story 14. A colleague accidentally unmuted himself during a meeting and said something snarky about another attendee. The meeting was being recorded. A different colleague told me he had been moderating a work-related town hall on Microsoft Teams that was being recorded for publication on the website. One attendee did not realize his camera was on and took his laptop into the bathroom to continue listening. Because most participants had their cameras off, his video appeared beside the presenters. The recording was quietly discarded. Story 15. I used to work at McDonald's. One of my coworkers was mopping the floor when a mother told her child to get a good job so he would not end up mopping floors. My coworker turned to her and said, "I'm just trying to pay for my mom's chemotherapy." I'll never forget the look on her face. Keep in mind that the person's mother was not sick at all. They were making it up. Story 16. That woman who took out nearly half the Tour de France peloton with her sign is unforgettable. I only saw it on television, but the secondhand embarrassment reverberated around the world. If that had been me, I would be considering planetary relocation. I cannot imagine it. I still think back on it and feel relief that I have never messed up that badly. Story 17. A new employee started at work, and a couple of us were standing around joking. A woman who works there and is fairly rough around the edges walked by. The new employee looked at the man we were talking with and said, "Damn, I feel bad for her husband." It was her husband we were talking to. Story 18. I went to an open house where an older real estate agent was helping the listing agent. He was excitedly walking through the empty house, describing features while looking back at my husband and me. He ran headfirst into the chandelier that would have been over the dining table. It happened so quickly we could not warn him. He became tangled and ripped the chandelier down as he fell face first, cutting himself badly. We still cringe when we think about it. We saw him at the supermarket recently and both whispered, "Oh no." Story 19. Bless my ex-girlfriend. She was a waitress and we were out to dinner with my parents. My mother tried the trying to use an expired coupon move on the waiter. She refused to accept that time is a thing and that the printed date had passed. While I zoned out and waited for my mother to either win or be escorted out by management, my ex-girlfriend was apparently slowly losing her mind. She suddenly snatched the dollar bill-sized coupon from my mother's hand, tore it up, and shoved the pieces into her mouth. She said that since there was no longer a coupon, there was no deal. It was nice to have the crazy woman be crazy on the staff's behalf for a change. Story 20. I was ringing up a woman and her boyfriend, and she was a few dollars short on her transaction. Her boyfriend then got in my face and insisted her Red Bull drinks were buy one, get one free. They had been part of a buy one, get one free promotion, but the promotion had ended months earlier. He proceeded to yell and scream at me for 5 minutes, saying she deserved the drinks and accusing me of denying them to her. Throughout this, his girlfriend was trying to disappear into the chip display like Homer sliding into a bush, clearly mortified. Eventually, after I threatened to have him trespassed, He gave me the biggest eye roll I have ever seen, spat on the floor and told his girlfriend, "Let's get out of here. This faggot clearly gets off on denying beautiful women what they need." Those were his exact words. Story 21. I worked in retail during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. A family would come in. A mother in her 40s, two middle school children, and a father wearing a Halloween Michael Myers mask with tape over his mouth and the word slave written in what appeared to be blood across his forehead. They shopped, but his wife and children looked as if they wanted the sweet release of death. Note, I should have been clearer. This happened when mask mandates were in effect. Story 22. Once, on the subway heading home from work when I lived in New York City, I was sitting in a 3-seat row with a 2-seat section beside me. A woman boarded and sat by the window nearby. A man sat next to her and asked for her phone number. She declined. When his stop came, he tried to run off, but the doors closed and he sat back down amid stares. He asked again and she politely refused. As he rose at the next stop, he dropped his phone and several items. His jacket had been off and things fell from his pockets. He missed the chance to get off, then bent to retrieve items that rolled as the train moved. After gathering his things, he finally got off. It was hard to watch. Story 23. A recruit at boot camp soiled himself. We had been at the rifle range all day, and they had to inspect every part of you to make sure you were not sneaking rounds back to the squad bay to shoot a drill instructor. They told us to stand, pull down our pants and underwear, and turn around. One of the drill instructors said, "What the fuck is this?" We all instinctively turned and saw a pale, skinny 19-year-old with feces all over his rear and camouflage uniform. I cannot describe the humiliation and horror I felt. They made him march with his pants around his ankles through the squad bay until the senior drill instructor came out to see what was happening. I did not have a bowel movement for a week after that. It was as if my body stopped producing it out of fear. We had 63 men in our platoon, and he was the only one who did not graduate. Story 24. When Ashley Simpson performed on Saturday Night Live, the wrong song started during her lip sync. She stood still for a moment and then did a little jig. Story 25. A man poured his heart out, confessing his admiration and respect for a male teacher and asking him to be his personal mentor. He said he would follow the teacher's teachings like a disciple and wrote a long message full of pleading and reasoning. I know because he accidentally posted it to the school's Facebook group chat, where everyone was included. I still cringe 10 years later from reading it. Story 26. A long time ago, I worked at an airport. We had an office with a large tinted glass window through which we could watch the passengers and the arrival hall. 3 of us were sitting by the window doing paperwork. We were exhausted after a long shift when one of my coworkers glanced out and thought he had spotted another coworker he disliked. He launched into a vicious rant, insulting her appearance and using harsh names. Turned out, because we were so tired, he had seen her reflection in the window. She was actually standing behind us. It was just the 3 of us and her in the room. I backed out of that room so quickly. Story 27. Many years ago, when I was a kid, I was on holiday with my family in a remote part of Indonesia. It was New Year's Eve and there was a small party in the hotel's restaurant, about half tourists and half locals. Everyone had some food and a few drinks, and it was going nicely. Then a man stood up and tapped his glass. He told the gathering that, as a proud West Virginian, he wanted to share something special from his culture. He proceeded to sing "Take Me Home, Country Roads" by John Denver earnestly, a cappella with tears in his eyes. My father is a blunt Australian. He could not contain himself. He tried for about 30 seconds but eventually lost it and laughed hysterically. He laughed so hard he cried, and others nearby started laughing too. In the background, the man kept singing, "West Virginia, Mountain Mama." Story 28. I am sure everyone felt this for me. I walked into work one day and everyone was standing around, and I asked what had happened. A colleague had taken his life. Story 29. I went to school for software development. It was a very difficult program with a high failure rate. On the first day of the second semester, we were hanging out when a student I knew from the program joined us. He had struggled during the first semester, so I was surprised to see him. We were talking about grades and he asked how we had seen ours. He had completed the semester without ever checking his own grades. We pulled up the school website, he logged in, and we pointed him to the grades section. Then he asked what the withdrawals meant. I looked and saw he had withdrawals in 3 classes, which are essentially equivalent to a failing grade. They mean he did not complete the courses. I told him that probably meant he could not continue in the program and that he should talk to the registrar's office. He seemed more confused than anything. He wandered off, and we never saw him again. Story 30. At one of my best friend's weddings, our other friend was the best man and gave, hands down, the worst best man speech I have ever heard. Between the anxiety and no preparation, it bombed spectacularly. He stumbled over his words, his jokes fell flat, and it was just awkward. He was not even drunk. Later that night, he asked why I had not saved him. I told him there was nothing to be done. He should have prepared. I would have bombed too. That said, he is fairly high in upper management at a well-known company. He has given speeches and spoken to chief executive officers, industry leaders, and at conferences and similar events. I expected better. Story 31. I saw a friend who was upset throw himself onto a couch, kick his feet, and pound his fists while he cried out that she should not correct him and that she was not his mother. She kicked him out of her apartment and broke up with him. I wondered how she had lasted so long. Story 32. A kid in my high school wore a toga for Toga Day. He had the day wrong, so he showed up half naked, wrapped in a sheet, when no one else was dressed up. Story 33. It was a funeral. The pastor spoke for 15 to 20 minutes about his latest mission trip and all the fun they had, and he mentioned the deceased only twice during the entire service. Even then, his comments were generic, such as he was a good man or he loved to work cattle. Those were actual quotes. He forgot to invite the people who were supposed to give eulogies. He made a joke to try to smooth things over. I was one of many who hugged the family and left before it got even more awkward. Story 34. I was at my Aunt Brenda's funeral. The priest called her Mary throughout the eulogy. Eventually my Uncle Hank yelled that her name is Brenda, asshole. My Uncle Bob, the widower, burst into tears. Story 35. This was years ago. I met a woman in her 40s who had a piercing in an unusual spot on her upper lip, about half an inch from her nose and toward her cheek. It was a plain circular piercing. A friend of mine, a male in his 20s who knew her, reached out and touched it, saying, "Sorry, you have something on your face." She gently recoiled. He tried again in front of others. I died a little that day. Story 36. I attended a fundamentalist evangelical college and saw their production of Faust because several friends were in it. For some reason, the director had all the actors wear sparkly, skin-tight spandex suits. The school still banned dancing, and on opening night, the actor playing Faust had a prominent erection for about an hour of the performance. Story 37. I was watching a man perform an aerial silk routine to Imagine Dragons when he got tangled, became stuck, and couldn't move. They had to stop the show and lower him to the floor face first. I went outside to cool down because I couldn't stop laughing. Story 38. I attended a small hospitality class with a man I was dating because students were presenting graded projects. When it was one student's turn, she connected her laptop to the projector and opened her Google Drive. The first thing that appeared on the screen in a room of 30 to 40 people was a video of her using a vibrator on herself. She closed it quickly, but everyone saw it. Story 39. A random acquaintance at a party seemed oddly obsessed with my race. In every conversation he made a bizarre joke about me being black, and the jokes fell flat. After each one he would anxiously look at me and say, "That's not offensive, is it? Because I'm not racist." I laughed it off and moved away, but he spent the rest of the night periodically coming up to me to apologize for the earlier jokes, despite my saying it was fine. Everyone at the party felt intense secondhand embarrassment, including me. Story 40. I embarrassed myself enough on my own. One situation from years ago still haunts me. I was 9 months pregnant, bored on a Saturday morning, and decided to look for garage sales to pass the time. I was very young and poor and needed things for a house my ex and I had just rented. I went to a few and then turned into a small neighborhood I had not been in before. I saw a house with tons of items in the garage and a few tables in the driveway. I started picking through things, carrying some items and making a pile. About 10 minutes passed, and an elderly woman came out of the house and asked how she could help me. I replied that I was just looking and would let her know if I needed anything. She looked really confused. My big, dumb, pregnant self started going through some curtains and things when it dawned on me to ask the prices of what I had already set aside. I asked if she could give me some prices. She replied that she had been looking for whatever had died in that garage. But if I needed some things, she could help me out. I declined and waddled to my car. Story 41. My boyfriend had a friend coming to town for the weekend. He asked if I knew someone who could go out with his friend so we could all go together. I asked the girl who lived next door to join us. We decided to stop at an ice cream shop before the movie. Right before we reached the door, something started splashing on our feet. We looked around and quickly realized that the girl I had asked to join us had wet her pants. She had clearly needed to go urgently. Needless to say, we didn't make it to the movie. Story 42. I was at a resort in Mexico. One night, the entertainment was a show where performers lip-synced and danced to the big musical numbers from Greece. In the middle of Beauty School Dropout, a middle-aged woman started walking down the center aisle, singing and dancing. She seemed completely serious, not like she had been dared or had lost a bet. She performed through the entire song and then took a bow. Her family was there and they barely reacted. I found it strange and embarrassing. Story 43. I was waiting for a friend after class when he asked a girl he had been interested in for a while, a girl who had been missing from class for a few weeks, out for a drink. She said she was flattered but had just lost her boyfriend in a motorcycle accident and was not in a good place. He apologized and stood stunned while she asked the professor for an extension on an assignment. Trying to be polite, she turned back and asked him how the class had been. He said it had been all right, but the assignments had been killing him. I died inside too. Story 44. I worked at a retail store and my manager was a super try-hard, dorky kind of guy. He idolized the sales manager and was obsessed to the point of adopting his phrases and mannerisms. Anyway, one night we all went out for karaoke and he, completely sober by the way, went up, announced he was dedicating a song to the sales manager, and sang There Goes My Hero by the Foo Fighters. I had to walk outside. I couldn't handle it. Story 45. A smoke break at a tech support call center. A really pretty woman asked if anyone there had a cigarette, and a pencil-necked geek got one for her quickly and insisted on lighting it. For the next 10 minutes, he tried to dominate the conversation because he thought this was about him and his chance with her. We were all standing around a garbage can with an ashtray on top. It was stuffed with lunch bags. The woman extinguished her cigarette and tried to put it in one side of the garbage can, but it was locked. The geek said, "Allow me," and launched into a strip mall karate kick, the biggest kick his 90 pounds could muster. The garbage can tipped over and the ashtray scattered wet sand, ashes, and cigarette butts everywhere and on everyone. All the smokers spent the last minutes of our break cleaning up. The geek just stood there, stiff, as if willing time to reverse what he had done and cost him his chance. He stayed even when the woman yelled at him to help. We finished cleaning up and left him standing there. Story 46. I got a service call about a heating and air unit being loud all night. It was her toy left on in the drawer. I didn't know how to tell her. Fuck. I'm still embarrassed. Story 47. I did not even have to be alive to be embarrassed for my mother when she was dating in her 20s. She was on a date with a man she really liked and ordered a salad because she did not want anything in her teeth. Mid-conversation, she bit into a cherry tomato that exploded, squirted across the table, and extinguished the candle at the center of the table. I die every time I think about this. Story 48. I went out with a friend of mine who is somewhat older than I am, but we are both boomers. We have been to many places, but it seemed like a switch flipped in her. She pushed her way in front of a customer at a jewelry store and then questioned that woman in detail about her travel money pouch, causing her to step back. I was so embarrassed for her. Later, we went to lunch and then to Forever 21, and in both places she spoke to the manager about turning down the music because it was too loud. Clerks have no control over the music they play. I wanted to crawl under a table. I am not shy, but I am not rude. It was awful. Story 49. In college, we had to introduce ourselves with a fun fact in my public speaking course. A woman introduced herself in a British accent. Her fact was that she liked to speak that way because she loved to travel. She was in my department, so I knew she was from the tri-state area, definitely not British. The professor asked her to repeat herself because he had not caught what she had said. Instead of taking the hint, she said the whole thing again. It might not sound that bad, but it still makes me cringe to this day. Story 50. A couple of girls in my graduating class attempted to forge paperwork to say they had a 4.0 grade point average in order to get the special cord to wear during our ceremony. They presented their forged documents to the administrator handing out cords at our graduation rehearsal. They were given their unearned cords and told to take a seat. When it came time for the last few people who legitimately earned a 4.0 cord, there were none left. This prompted an investigation by the director of our program. He reviewed every person who had presented documents, which were note cards with our names handwritten along with a note about any special accomplishments, and cross-matched them with his own list of 4.0 students. He was easily able to find the fakers, and in front of the entire graduating class they were made to remove their unearned cords and were called out for lying. It was dead silent in the auditorium as each of them marched up to the front and handed back the stolen cords. It was one of the most embarrassing things I have ever seen. Story 51. A mildly popular travel vlogger decided to sing an original song at every destination he visited. Not only did the music sound like cheesy 1990s karaoke, but the lyrics were insipid. He could not sing at all. He was brave to try, but it was terrible. Fortunately for his viewers, he stopped after just a few episodes. The comments were not kind. Story 52. The first thing that comes to mind is watching a very intoxicated white man at a party try to explain that his friend had given him permission to use a racial slur, then continually dig himself deeper by saying awkward, vaguely positive things about black people for 15 minutes. Story 53. I recently went to an open mic night at a local comedy club. Each comedian was terrible except for one who was a comedy magician. He would do some magic and then hilariously reveal how he did it. It just worked. The other 10 performers bombed hard one after another. The silence was deafening. I felt so bad for them that I would laugh awkwardly even when it was not that funny. I was in the front row so they could see I was on their side and would focus on me, trying to act like Russell Peters and banter with the crowd. Anyway, they all sucked except the magician, but I applaud them for getting up there and bombing in public. I felt so embarrassed for them. Story 54. My friend and I were both texting the same person at the same time because we were upset with them. She took a screenshot of the conversation to send to me but accidentally sent it to that person instead. Story 55. When I was 18-20 years ago, I worked at Starbucks as a barista and I loved it. During the summer of 2004, my grandfather passed away unexpectedly from a heart attack. I was working when it happened. My mom came in to give me the news and I left. A few days later, I was back at work. It was a full crew and we were busy. Right before I hit the floor, my manager called me into the back to check on me and to tell me she had gotten feedback from her district manager that I had crushed the interview for a shift supervisor position at a new store opening. I was super jazzed and hit the floor ready to go. That day, I was working the drive-thru with Jax, whose name is Jackie, and she could be a ball of energy. Whenever we worked together, she would make these double shot slammers that had 4 pumps of white mocha, 4 packets of raw sugar, and whipped cream on top. So essentially, you had 2 cranked-up baristas making drinks, sweating, and with heart palpitations. During the shift, it was announced that I was being promoted, so everyone was really happy for me. They were also very sweet about my grandfather's passing. It was a bittersweet day. As I was making drinks at the bar, I noticed a card being passed around and it wasn't reaching me. So I figured it was a condolences card for my grandfather. At one point, I saw Jax grab it, write a message, and hand it to my manager. At the end of my shift, they gave it to me and it was full of sweet sympathy messages from everyone. Then my eye was drawn to a message from Jax that read, "Get it. Bitch, congrats. I'm so proud of you. You better not be a stranger around here or you'll be dead to me. She had been hyped up on caffeine and in a rush and thought it was a congratulations card for my promotion. I started laughing when I realized what she had done, and another coworker read it and, in front of everyone, called her out. Jax was mortified and took it hard. I told her I thought it was hilarious and not to worry. She spent the rest of her shift embarrassed and apologizing profusely. Needless to say, she probably reads the group card now before she signs it. Story 56. I signed up to play on an adult soccer team. My sister-in-law signed up too, and we were standing around getting to know the other team members. Our team captain introduced himself and was talking to another player. He spoke a little differently but was completely understandable, with some words that sounded different. Then I noticed he was wearing hearing aids. Apparently the other player had not noticed and asked, "Where are you from?" "England." That accent is wild. I stood there for maybe 2 seconds before turning and kicking my ball across the field to have an excuse to flee. I have never run so fast or cringed so hard. I got to the ball and stopped, and my sister-in-law ran right into my back. She took off with me and I had no idea. We looked at each other with big eyes, silently dying, and just kicked the ball back and forth. I'm still cringing when I think about it. Story 57. It was our 4th day and a new hire joined us. We had heard his wife had been having a baby, so he started a couple of days late. One coworker asked whether it was a boy or a girl. He said it was a boy. When asked how he was doing, he said the baby did not make it. It became very quiet. Story 58. I was out for dinner with my family. My brother used a wheelchair and would have been a teenager at the time. A drunk woman came up to us, looked at him, then turned to my mom and asked, "Is he like that famous astrologer?" She meant Stephen Hawking. Story 59. I was at a music festival a few years back, spending the evening drinking at the campsite with friends. One friend started chatting with a stranger who was camping close to us. He walked over and joined our conversation for a while, then went back to his own friends. About an hour later, we noticed the same man, but now in a wheelchair, pushing himself along the path through the middle of the campground. My friend, pretty drunk by this point, stood up and started shouting something like, "How did you get that drunk so quickly? You were walking an hour ago. Who did you steal that wheelchair from?" Turned out to be a different man. Story 60. A person from another department whom I hadn't seen in a while walked up to me one day at work and said, "Congrats. When are you due?" I grinned and replied, "Oh, I'm not pregnant, just fat." He was mortified. I thought it was hilarious. Story 61. I witnessed a fully grown man having an absolute meltdown at SeaWorld because he wanted to pet a stingray and lightning was striking, so he could not. He argued with the employee, who did not know what to say because he kept insisting. Story 62. My mom berated a Kmart cashier. I think it was over something stupid like rewards points. There was a huge line behind us, and I still had to check out after her. Story 63. When a woman mistakenly sent me pictures in lingerie, I did not respond. She asked if I had received them, and I replied that she had the wrong number. Story 64. I went to a cousin's wedding many years ago. The bride got drunk at the reception and, in her speech, began criticizing her ex-husband and gushing over her boss, who was there with his wife. Story 65. My ex had a massive ego. One of the things he was proud of was football, even though his team played in a very low division and had never won. One day I drove him to his game. As we approached the field, he said, "Oh yes, these guys are total middle-aged losers. We're going to beat them for sure," and went on about how some of them were fat, ugly, balding, and probably only playing to get away from their wives and terrible home lives. I stayed mostly quiet. I hate when people insult others based on looks, and I had told him off about it many times, so I simply told him good luck. They lost 7-0. Not only that, the loss caused them to be relegated to an even lower division because they had lost by too much. At the time, I felt intense secondhand embarrassment for him, but now I just laugh and call it karma. Story 66. My parents were visiting once, and my mom had some back pain. My dad said he needed to go to Target but did not tell me he was looking for a massage gun. Instead, he walked up to the first employee he saw, a teenager, and said, "Excuse me, where do you keep the vibrators?" Story 67. A girl walked onto the stage in front of hundreds of people to accept an award. She heard the name Olivia and assumed it was hers, but the actual winner was also named Olivia. When they realized they had given the award to the wrong Olivia, she screamed, burst into tears, and ran off the stage. Story 68. A man joined a video meeting with cameras on that included several hundred headquarters employees at my global company and exposed himself on camera. Story 69. My boss was arguing with an Uber driver about which direction we were supposed to go, and then said, "I apologize. I was holding my phone upside down." Story 70. I went to the Barbie movie. During the first few minutes, when people were gagging, my mother began to projectile vomit. The theater was packed. Story 71. It was in 7th grade. I was sitting at someone else's desk for a class I do not remember when a piece of paper fell out. I picked it up and was about to put it back when I saw it was a poorly drawn comic. The comic featured the girl whose desk I was sitting at and one of the so-called popular boys in the grade. It was clearly self-indulgent. For context, the girl was often picked on. It was never outright bullying, but many of the other girls did not like her and she did not have many friends. In the comic, the popular boy defended her from one of the popular girls and then professed his love. I knew what I had in my hands was like a nuclear bomb. I put the comic back in her desk and did not tell anyone. Aside from the intense cringe and embarrassment, I wanted to tell her to be neater and more careful with her things, but I never did. Story 72. I was at a company party in 2013, and the owner's spouse was drunk. He urinated in a fountain in full view of everyone. I felt more embarrassed for the owner than for him. Most people thought it was hilarious. Story 73. I sat across from two women at lunch. When they stood to leave, the tablecloth was sandwiched between one woman's thighs. As she rose, it tugged and pulled her skirt down to her knees. The crash of falling dishes drew the attention of anyone who had not noticed, and she stood there in her underwear, pulling up her skirt. Story 74. One time a man came to our campus to give a talk during lunch. He plugged in his laptop so it was ready to project. When he opened it, his Chrome browser was displaying adult content and the audio was playing from his computer. He passed out, and someone nearby closed the laptop for him since he had fallen to the floor. He got up a few seconds later and seemed physically okay. The room was totally silent. I tried to make him feel better by pretending I had seen nothing. I assumed the rest of the room did the same. He still had to present to professors, postdocs, and students for an hour as if nothing had happened. I felt so bad for him and sometimes wonder how he is doing and whether he has recovered. Story 75. In high school, my then boyfriend, now husband, and one of my best friends were both in the theater. One of the short plays they were going to perform was a new comedy, and I watched a rehearsal. I was not a big fan of theater, but this was genuinely funny. On performance night, one of the actors completely messed up his lines. It was really bad. Lines from the end of the play were said much too early. He would try to backtrack a few minutes later, but it made no sense because the other actors were trying to compensate and improvise, or he would just go blank. The entire audience knew what was happening, but it was painful to watch and it drained all the humor. More than a decade later, we still joke about it. Story 76. My friend had an obvious erection in his pants while exchanging vows at his wedding. He was wearing very loose pants. It was the 1990s, so it stuck out like a big tent. It was not subtle, no one could miss it. I distinctly remember his grandmother saying, "Oh my God," and everyone laughed awkwardly. Overall, it was a painfully uncomfortable experience. Story 77. Does anyone remember the video of the man in the front row of the airliner saying, "Passengers of Flight 183, can I get in a yeah?" And no one responded? His girlfriend wanted to disappear. Story 78. We were at Denny's, and my dad was tapping the ketchup bottle on its side. He got so into his story that he hit it so hard the ketchup splattered onto the woman sitting to his left. She was wearing white. Story 79. I never experienced secondhand embarrassment. I was always the one causing it. Story 80. I grew up in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, commonly called the Mormon Church. The first Sunday of every month was a fast and testimony meeting, where members were expected to fast until dinner and share their testimonies at the podium, usually about the gospel, the prophet, or Jesus. It was routine, and many testimonies sounded canned. For example, "I love to bear my testimony," "I know the church is true," "I know a particular leader is a true prophet," and similar statements. One fast and testimony meeting, a middle-aged woman whose husband was a member of the bishopric came to the podium to share that she had been struggling with a severe pornography addiction that was damaging her marriage and family. She described how her husband was hurt by how often she viewed pornography and that she had withheld marital intimacy from him. Their sons and many other children were in the congregation. I think we all collectively deleted that memory as soon as the meeting ended because no one could handle the embarrassment. Story 81. I have had some serious real-life experiences with that, but after all these years it is still Scott's tots. Story 82. My son was very involved in sports and regularly attended national tournaments. He practiced 4 times a week. Obviously, his coach was an important person in my son's life, and my family had heard a lot about him. When my parents attended a nearby tournament, they finally met his coach. My dad shook his hand and said, "Nice to meet you, my brother." Just like Tom Hanks in the Saturday Night Live sketch. I wanted to melt into the floor. Story 83. One of my best friends, a 28-year-old man, had been dating a 23-year-old woman for about 4 years. He told me he wanted to get married. He was a classic stoner line cook living in his mother's garage with no money, no car, and a borderline alcohol and cocaine problem. I told him he should probably get other things in his life squared away before making a commitment like this, but he insisted this was what he wanted. He had not brought up marriage with her, but he did say he wanted to start having children, and she said she did not want any. That was a near deal breaker for him, so I did not understand why he suddenly wanted to get married. One day, after dinner with my parents, I stopped by his house to say hello. When I walked in, 4 other people and his mother were standing in the kitchen. She told us to be quiet, dimmed the lights, and my friend lit a candle with a picture of Drake on it and placed it on the TV stand. His girlfriend pulled up, and my friend's mother shoved us into the laundry room next to the kitchen. As the girlfriend walked in, the mother had us file out slowly and stand awkwardly in the kitchen. The kitchen looked out into the living room over the stove. My friend took her into the living room and said they had been together for a while and that he wanted to take the next step. He got down on one knee and asked her to marry him with no ring. She looked at us through the gap between the stove and the cabinets, turned beet red, said she was not ready, and ran out to her car. My friend looked at us sheepishly and said, "That is not how I expected it to go." We stood in painfully awkward silence for several minutes. I felt secondhand embarrassment. Story 84. My company used to have a monthly cross-functional meeting with different groups from various departments. Each group was led by a senior leader, and the idea was to make the company feel smaller and to share what was going on in each department. At one meeting, we all walked into the conference room, about 15 to 20 of us, and chatted for a bit. After everyone settled, a young woman none of us knew began addressing the group. She said her name and department, then asked that we all go around and do the same. Since this is a large company, the first few people went with the flow, thinking they were alone in their confusion, but her follow-up questions became increasingly bizarre and made no sense. Finally, the executive leading the meeting said gently that it was a Group 1 meeting for the investment teams of our division and asked what meeting she meant to join. She was new, in the wrong conference room, and believed everyone there was in some way part of a team she would be leading. The entire room exploded in laughter. I still cringe for her, but it was hilarious. Story 85. An older woman came into my bakery and asked if we had a bathroom. We told her we were sorry but did not have public restrooms. She said that was okay and that she would like to order a cake. While she was waiting, we could smell that she had soiled her pants. She left and returned a few hours later to pick up her cake. I felt bad for her then, but she has since become a regular and is rude every time. Another time, my husband saw a Kroger employee pushing carts as we pulled into the parking lot. He pointed him out and said, "Man, I wish I could be like that guy. He's just so happy, dancing at work. The guy's having the time of his life." The employee was physically disabled, and my husband had thought he was simply cheerful. He still cringes when he remembers it. Story 86. I was at a funeral in a hoity-toity Southern Baptist church. The preacher kept saying the wrong name for the deceased. Story 87. I was getting ready to ship off to war when the girl I had been dating, with whom I had not yet been intimate and for whom I was desperately in love, came back to my hotel room so we could change and head to dinner. She said she needed to change and acted as if she were about to undress, so I told her she could change in the bathroom. It was not until later that I realized she wanted to get intimate, and I blew it. I felt intense embarrassment. I was a real player. Story 88. I was at a museum when a woman next to me leaned in for a closer look and bumped her head on the glass. She thought nobody had noticed until she saw me laughing, and then she was mortified. Story 89. At my daughter's birthday party, my soon-to-be sister-in-law compared my engagement ring with hers and then kissed her ring. People saw and heard her. Story 90. Dakota B. If you read this, I'm really sorry, girl. In middle school in the early 2000s, at dances called fortnights at my school, kids liked to form dance circles so good dancers could show off a little. I was near the bottom rung of the social ladder, but just above me was Dakota B. She was skinny, awkward, buck-toothed, a little greasy, and really sweet. She always tried very hard to fit in and wore name-brand clothes and so on, but she remained an awkward loner throughout our school years. One fortnight at the end of 8th grade, Dakota bravely jumped into one of those circles. With her eyes shut, she quietly began doing what kids today would call an emote. A small hip wiggle, hands up, running them down her body, then resetting. It was a 2-second move she repeated, turning in a little circle, completely offbeat and painfully awkward, sweating the whole time. It was obvious she had practiced this many times and had been working up the courage for this moment. I have no idea how long it lasted, but it felt like an eternity. I think Fergalicious was playing, but I swear it felt like you could hear a pin drop. I think about it all the time. I remember being the poor, wheelchair-bound, fat girl and cringing so hard for her. Story 91. My brother-in-law and his wife had a contentious divorce. The situation peaked when she posted several years of their tax returns on Facebook and Instagram with no personal information redacted. Her own personal information was exposed as well. The replies showed no sympathy, with comments such as, "I know you are mad, but you have to take that down, and he should sue you for posting this stuff." She would not back down, but she did disappear from social media about a week later. I have not seen her since. This was about 10 years ago. To be honest, I was surprised how much my brother-in-law earned. Far more than his older brother, my husband. In a way, it backfired and made him look very successful. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.